Good evening, and welcome to the Evansville-Vanderburgh County Human Relations Commission virtual annual dinner and Mayor's Celebration of Diversity Awards. I'm so delighted to be with you as we honor and recognize this year's Mayor's Celebration of Diversity Award recipients. Stalwarts in the fight for equality and justice in these unprecedented times. Their commitment to uplifting humankind is remarkable and so very much appreciated. I'm amazed by the exceptional leadership and compassion that has galvanized our community in support of the needs of those afflicted by this pandemic. Without the unwavering hard work and support by these award recipients and others, our community would not be what it is. A resilient community that puts the concerns of others first. I want to say thank you. Thank you for your commitment. As your mayor, nothing makes me more proud than to witness individuals and organizations engage in community uplift and being advocates for equity and inclusion. We mourned in 2020 the loss of a great civil rights leader, Congressman John Lewis. One of Representative Lewis's favorite quotes, most famous for, goes like this: "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic." Our struggle is not a struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is a struggle of a lifetime. Never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. Remarkable words. That's the spirit of tonight's award recipients. That's what they exemplify day in and day out. They are beacons and continue to work for more just existence for everyone in our city. Sadly, in 2020, tragic events such as the killing of unarmed people brought about demonstrations across our city, our state, and our world. I stand with our local community and citizens across our country in condemning racism of all kinds, of all forms, individual, institutional, and structural. Racial justice work must be ongoing and part of every aspect of municipal government. We must continue to come together and continue to work for racial justice, equity, and inclusion. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude and appreciation to the Human Relations Commission for its hard work planning this wonderful virtual meeting. And let's hope we don't have to do virtual again next year, right? To the commissioners, Executive Director Diane Clements Boyd, and the staff, thank you. Thank you for your dedication to serving our community and meeting this moment. This year's theme is one that I believe addresses the very critical times that we find ourselves in. The theme, justice and equity in healthcare. How do we get there? It's timely as we navigate the difficult times of this pandemic. Without a doubt, the pandemic has revealed community challenges from addressing food insecurity, affordable and stable housing, and access to education, all of which affect the overall health and well-being of our city. It's encouraging and exciting to have two renowned physicians as tonight's keynote speakers to engage in a discussion on achieving justice and equity in healthcare and sharing best practices. To the acclaimed keynote speakers tonight, Dr. Kamara Jones and Dr. Jonathan Metzl, please allow me to extend a heartfelt welcome to this virtual space and to our community. Thank you for being with us and for sharing your life's work. We are looking forward to hearing your insights and practical solutions to issues we face as a community. Please stay tuned as you will hear from Dr. Jones and Dr. Metzl very shortly. Finally, thank you to everyone for viewing and listening tonight and your participation and your ongoing support. To the recipients of the 2020 Mayor's Celebration of Diversity Award recipients, congratulations and thank you for your hard work, commitment, and your investment in Evansville. Please enjoy the rest of our program and continue to work for diversity equity, and inclusion in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Winneke. Thank you for all of those words. My name is Angie Humphrey, and many of you know me because I host a daytime television show for ABC 25 called Local Lifestyles. And I want to say it's more than a pleasure for me to be here tonight. It is a privilege to be here in this virtual world because celebrating diversity and justice is really what we should all be about. And this night is so important for that reason. So I'm glad to be a part of the Evansville Vanderburgh County Human Relations Commission's annual dinner and the Mayor's Celebration of Diversity Awards, which is the longest title of any event I've hosted in a decade, but it's still important. And there's so much in store for you tonight. Tonight, we'll recognize many deserving people in our community, people that the mayor will honor with his celebration of diversity awards. Now, these awards recognize businesses, organizations, and of course, individuals that embrace and celebrate diversity, inclusion, and justice in all they do in our community. And it's so exciting too. I hope you feel it through this virtual world. I hope you feel the excitement of this important evening. And later on, we'll hear from two phenomenal physicians. The mayor has talked about these guests, and I've had the opportunity to meet them and just sit in their light. And it is so impressive and life-changing. Tonight, we'll tackle the theme of this year's event, which is justice and equity in healthcare. How do we get there? The conversation will be a wonderful, powerful, enlightening exchange between two physicians, Dr. Kamara Jones and Dr. Jonathan Metzl. They're passionate about their work and they're passionate about the well-being of others. And I know you want to be a part of this conversation. So call a friend, gather your friends around so they can hear, so you can hear the exchange, the conversation, the energy that will be created as we look into and tackle this challenging topic. But before we get to the awards and the keynote address, you'll hear from the chairperson of the Human Relations Commission, Ms. Ruby McGlown, and she'll be followed by the executive director, Ms. Diane Clements Boyd. Enjoy this evening.
Good evening. My name is Ruby McGlown. I'm proud to serve as the chairperson of the Evansville Vanderburgh County Human Relations Commission. I have served on the commission for approximately 20 years. As a lifelong resident of Evansville, I have a deep concern of community issues and the mission of the Human Relations Commission to address issues of equal opportunity and advocate for the rights of all people. Without a doubt, these are difficult times for this community and our nation. It is important that we recommit to being our brothers and sisters keepers. In addition to helping our residents with discrimination issues, we are keenly aware that our communities are dealing with gun violence, unemployment, lack of housing opportunities, and overall devastation of the pandemic. I would be remiss if I did not take the time to acknowledge my committed colleagues on the commission, and they are Daniel Davis, first vice chairperson, Xavier Harrington, second vice chairperson, Dan Carwile, secretary, Shanika Balzel, Tim Black, Tanisha Carruthers, Rick Kubler, Jason Miner, Estella Moss, Nicholas Walderman. As a longtime community advocate, I invite you to join the Human Relations Commission as we continue to advocate for the human and civil rights of all. Social justice does not happen easily or automatically. It requires the dedicated work of people who are committed to advocating the cause of freedom and dignity for all. As always, the Human Relations Commission stand ready to work alongside you that struggle.
Good evening, and thank you for your support of the Human Relations Commission Annual Dinner and Mayor Celebration of Diversity Awards. My name is Diane Clements Boyd, and I am so pleased to be with you on this evening. This is our first virtual dinner, and we are so appreciative to everyone that helped make this event possible. This event would not be possible without the support of our premier sponsors. Please allow me to thank our community partners and sponsors for this event: Deaconess Health System, CenterPoint Energy, and the University of Southern Indiana. Thank you for your generous support. I want to acknowledge and thank Mayor Lloyd Winnecke for all of his support, as well as the Vanderbilt County Commissioners, Evansville City Council, and the Vanderbilt County Council. Thank you, thank you, thank you. To our chairperson, Ruby McGlown, and the exceptional group of commissioners that show their commitment to the community and the Human Relations Commission in countless ways, thank you. I am so proud to serve alongside you. Congratulations to all of the award recipients. Tonight's honorees are amazing and work tirelessly on behalf of the community. Thank you for your commitment and service in this community. Your work is so essential to this community. I must take this opportunity to recognize and thank our staff at the Commission for their great service to the community and all their assistance with this event. Thank you to investigators Jamila Smith, Anitra Murphy, Shadrach Mensa, and Office Manager Bonnie Fox. Thank you all so much for your hard work and your commitment. I would also like to acknowledge Counsel for the Commission, Attorney Ted Ziemer. Thank you so much. We are so appreciative. In addition to our premier sponsors, Deaconess Health System, CenterPoint Energy, and the University of Southern Indiana, we want to also acknowledge donors. Thank you to Old National Bank and the Red Cross of Southern Indiana for your support. We also want to thank our federal partners, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, for their ongoing support of civil rights enforcement. We are so appreciative of the opportunity to work alongside the nation's leading civil rights agencies in this fight. Please visit our website and access the annual report to learn more about the work of the Human Relations Commission. Established in 1948 to address intergroup relations in Evansville, the Commission has evolved in the last 70 plus years. The Human Relations Commission is not just an enforcement agency of local civil rights ordinances. Civil rights enforcement is an important part of our work, and we are proud to serve the community by investigating complaints of discrimination on the basis of employment, housing, public accommodations, and education. But we are also committed to fulfilling our mission to address social justice in our community. This requires that we explore the root causes that lead to discriminatory housing practices and discrimination in employment. This is not always easy work, but this is the work of the Human Relations Commission. The Human Relations Commission holds an educational forum annually in April to commemorate the passage of the Fair Housing Act. In 2020, during Fair Housing Month, we held a virtual panel discussion, Real Talk, Fair Housing Discrimination in the Midst of COVID-19. The panel of fair housing experts, government officials, attorneys, and housing advocates discussed strategies to identify, address, and overcome housing discrimination in the wake of COVID-19. The conversation focused on the disparate impact and treatment of special populations as our communities grappled with the pandemic. The panel discussed housing policies and the complexities of how housing discrimination can manifest in this era. That's real talk. When communities across the globe protested the killings of unarmed people of color, the Human Relations Commission released a statement affirming its commitment to combating racism. Human Relations Commission Chairperson Ruby McGlown said, "We encourage the community to stand together in dismantling racism in all its forms. The statement went on to say that the time is now for our city to come together to tackle racism in all its forms by addressing the normalization and the legitimization of white supremacy, racist institutional policies and practices, and implicit or explicit bias. We could not do community relations work without our local advisory boards. We would like to thank and recognize David Wagner, chairperson of the Evansville Commission on the Social Status of African American Males, and the commissioners for all they do to make Evansville a more just place for Black males. The Social Status Commission was established in 1999 by state statute to study the problems affecting African American males in Indiana. The Social Status Commission and its members are doing phenomenal work in this community, and we are so very grateful. The Evansville Commission on the Social Status of African American Males took on criminal justice reform and hosted a virtual event on October 22nd of 2020, titled Criminal Justice Reform, Seeking Equality, Access, and Opportunity, focused on criminal record discrimination, Indiana's second chance law or expungement law, and other issues to include disproportionate arrest, incarcerations, and killings of unarmed people of color. The panelists included local, state, and federal officials and was streamed live on social media. When the Advisory Board on Disability Services could not go into the restaurants due to the pandemic and implement the Accessibility Decal Program, a voluntary program to recognize local businesses that are accessible to persons with disabilities, they reevaluated and decided to promote a new free online resource to assist individuals with disabilities locate programs, equipment, and advocacy efforts. Finder is available to all county residents who have a disability and to all residents and organizations that assist with people with disabilities. Developed in 2018 through an initiative funded by AWS Foundation, Finder gives Indiana residents living with disabilities 24/7 access to a comprehensive range of community resources designed to improve their quality of life. I would also like to thank Mark Weatherwax, chairperson of the Advisory Board on Disability Services, and the members. The Advisory Board was established in 2009 to provide guidance in matters concerning individuals with disabilities. Mark has been a committed leader on behalf of the commission, traveling throughout the state, learning ways to better serve people with disabilities in our community. Thanks to the commitment from the members of the Advisory Board on Disability Services, the community benefits by their tireless efforts on behalf of individuals with disabilities and their families. Now, before I turn this back over to our esteemed host, Ms. Angie Humphrey, to introduce this year's keynote speakers, I would like to recognize civil rights pioneers that we lost since we last came together. We stand on their shoulders, and they will forever be in our hearts and undoubtedly drive our work. Please join me in recognizing these individuals and their life's work. Reverend Joseph Lowry, Reverend C.T. Vivian, Congressman John Lewis, Congressman Elijah Cummings, Mrs. Juanita Abernathy, and our former Human Relations Commissioner and local civil rights icon, Dr. Anthony Brooks. Thank you. Again, please visit our webpage to learn more about the Human Relations Commission. Visit www.vanderburgh.gov.org and go to city departments to find the Evansville-Vanderburgh County Human Relations Commission. Thank you, viewing and listening audience, for your continued support and for being a part of this evening. Please enjoy the program. We are so pleased to have with us veteran broadcast journalist, Ms. Angie Humphrey, to introduce the keynote speakers and facilitate a discussion with distinguished physicians, Dr. Kamara P. Jones and Dr. Jonathan Metzel. Angie Humphrey is a welcomed and friendly face in homes throughout the tri-state with her show, ABC 25 local lifestyles. She provides a space for local celebrities to tell their stories. She's a local treasure, and we are so thrilled to have her with us to facilitate this discussion. Thank you.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to present the 2020 Mayor's Celebration of Diversity Awards. All the award recipients are selected based on their significant commitment to enhancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in Evansville. And now for the first award. It's the Willie Effie Thomas Development Award. When our recipients attempts to bring healthcare knowledge to the community via her Facebook page, they received dozens of likes. That is diversity impact. This doctor posts on social media say to please watch, or this could help our community, and let me know if you have questions. All in attempts to educate those who are hard to reach in our community and make sure they trust science so they can ask her questions to get the clarity they need. The recipient is a beloved staff member at the Peyton Manning Children's Hospital at Ascension St. Vincent here in Evansville, where she also serves on the Medical Executive Committee. In addition to this, she is an adjunct clinical faculty member at the Indiana University School of Medicine Evansville campus, helping to educate a whole new generation of healthcare professionals. She also serves on the advisory boards for the Black Nurses of Evansville and Tri-State Tri-State Professional Advocates. Serving as a member of the Black Nurses of Evansville as a volunteer and a board member gives her the chance to advocate for health equity and educate underserved populations within our city. She also makes time to serve our community as a member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I am delighted to present this year's Willie Effie Thomas Development Award to Dr. Antoinette Caldwell, pediatrician with Ascension St. Vincent here in Evansville. Next, for our Leadership Award. Our next recipient is an organization that seeks to fill the gaps and empower families in the Evansville area. The organization was conceived in 1994 with the mission to engage, educate, and empower individuals and families through innovative programs and services. The primary focus is to change the social, educational, economic, cultural, and physical course of Evansville and surrounding communities, and their accomplishments can be seen in the center city of Evansville and beyond. Since 1999, the organization has developed over 125 housing units, and it addressed core areas to include affordable housing, economic development, health and wellness, education and youth programs, social justice, and much more. Not afraid to challenge the status quo for the betterment of the least of these, visionary leader Dr. Adrian M. Brooks Sr. and the Memorial Community Development Corporation are successfully meeting the needs of the poverty-stricken and working families in the Center City. The organization is also preparing to reopen a healthcare clinic in partnership with Deaconess. The Leadership Award goes to our good friends at the Memorial Community Development Corporation. Next, it's a pleasure to jump to the Sue Woodson Community Relations Award. Our next recipient has worked tirelessly to make the community a better place to live in. In 2019, she sought out to make a difference by running for public office and won her bid in that effort. Since then, she has started a nonprofit organization and a client choice pantry in a food desert area and a transportation program to help the elderly to access their services they need. She became a voice for those concerned about and resolved to combating gun violence in Evansville. In 2015, she founded Mothers Against Senseless Killings, or MASK, to address the growing concerns of gun violence in our community. She's a true advocate for the community and for the city. Even through adversity, she has continued to be a positive and proven leader to help this community and to help Pigeon Township. She is also a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and serves as the social action co-chair serving the Evansville Alumni Chapter of DCT. I'm pleased to present the Sue Woodson Community Relations Award to Pigeon Township trustee Mariama Wilson. Next to the Workforce Diversity Award. The next recipient plans strategically to enhance the corporate culture of inclusion. His involvement and accolades are many and include creating professional mentoring programs, intentionally recruiting talented candidates with disabilities, promoting inclusivity through awareness and education. His volunteer experience includes board of directors for the Growth Alliance of Greater Evansville, the board for Special Olympics Indiana, the USI Alumni Association, and he does countless public speaking events. He also represents the First Ward as our city council member. On LinkedIn, he describes himself as, quote, creating an inclusive company culture takes deliberate action and intentional effort. In my career at Old National, I've had the pleasure of planting the seeds of inclusion, specifically for people with disabilities in the workforce by fostering relationships that blossom in the shape of mentorships, internships, and full-time employment opportunities. A disability advocate that aims to knock down assumptions, rethink recruiting processes, and encourage the growth of people with disabilities in the workforce. It's an honor to present this year's Workforce Diversity Award to my very dear friend, Ben Trockman. The final award is the highest honor bestowed this evening, and it's a pleasure to present it today. It's reserved for someone who has truly distinguished themselves as a civil and human rights advocate for all people. This year's winner embodies the true spirit of the award, named for human and civil rights stalwart Sedell Berger. The recipient cares so much about not only the health of his patients, but the health of the city of Evansville and all of Vanderburgh County. Unlike any other physician in our city, he's a regular at the Common Council meetings of Evansville, speaking on budget issues and how the city council's decisions impact the housing and health of low and moderate income families. The recipient has asked City Council and County Council to reassess proposals to spend more on reducing physical and mental health issues confronting poor and disenfranchised citizens throughout our city. He has also spoken at a number of community board meetings on behalf of struggling members of our community. The recipient goes above and beyond the stereotypical healthcare provider to join with groups such as Congregations Acting for Justice and Empowerment and Bridge, Building Respect and Integrity in Diverse Greater Evansville. In their missions to partner with all race, ethnic, and faith groups to create opportunities for engagement in an atmosphere of respect and openness. Without a doubt, his exemplary community involvement goes beyond his work requirements. He is a family medicine specialist in Evansville and currently practices at Echo Community Healthcare and is affiliated with Ascension St. Vincent Evansville and Deaconess Hospital. I proudly present the Sedell Berger Award to Dr. Thomas Stratton. On behalf of the entire city, please allow me to offer my heartfelt congratulations to the men and women we've honored in this program for their heartfelt and steadfast commitment to diversity and inclusion and respect in our city. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you in the virtual world and with our distinguished guest, because tonight this is an important discussion, a timely discussion, a powerful topic. We're looking at justice and equity in healthcare and how we get there. And joining me this evening, two physicians who have a passion for community, for health, and for justice. And I want to introduce them both to you. They have such impressive bios. And I don't want to embarrass either one of you, but I've just been so grateful to read the stories about you. First, Dr. Kamara Jones, H and PhD, the Evelyn Green Davis Fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University and past president of the American Public Health Association. Dr. Jones is course, is a speaker on many of the topics that we are going to discuss tonight, working to help communities and systems find the cracks in the system and to heal those. She is a physician, an epidemiologist, and our honored guest. Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. And Dr. Jonathan Metzl is an acclaimed physician, psychiatrist, sociologist who speaks and writes on a range of topics, including the topics we discussed tonight: gun violence, race and gender, social injustice, and healthcare. He is the author of a book that I encourage you all to purchase immediately if you have not already. Dr. Metzl, this has been very powerful for me, eye-opening, a lot to process, but it is so worth the journey into this social pain in our country. It is called Dying of Whiteness: How the Politics of Racial Resentment is Killing America's Heartland. It was a New York Times bestseller. Dr. Metzl is the Frederick B. Rentschler II Professor of Sociology, Psychiatry, and the Director of the Center of Medicine, Health, and Society at Vanderbilt University. So welcome to both of you. So glad you're here. And we want to remind you that this is being recorded several weeks before this presentation evening. And Dr. Jones reminded us in our first meeting that many things could have changed by the time we recorded this and we air it. So we are aware that in this fast-moving news cycle, things can change pretty rapidly. We also want to let you know that we have an invitation for you, that this is not going to be a three-sided conversation at all. You can be a part of this and add your voice. After the presentation ends, we will go to Facebook Live, and you can send your questions in. As you've been listening, I'm sure you'll be writing questions down, and we will all come back together again for a Facebook Live. If you're watching on WNIN, you can go to their website and discover the pathway in. There is a web address that you can use. And if you're on Facebook, you're good. Just stay right there, and you can be a part of this conversation and add your voice. So again, Dr. Jones, Dr. Metzl, thank you both for taking the time to be with us, to dig in to these topics this evening.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Well, I think we all know that this has been a year like no other, and the year's not even over yet. We have been through months that have been trying and painful and gut-wrenching for every single person on this globe. It is this pandemic has united us in this one way that has impacted everybody. Besides our humanity, it is the virus that has impacted all of us, and it's changed our lives. And it's also made us aware, painfully and importantly aware, that systems are broken. And you've surely heard, both of you heard this wise person say that the broken places are where the light gets in. And in this case, the light is glaring as it rolls through the broken places. And we can see where there's such an imbalance and such disparity for people getting health care that they need and other services because of COVID. So, Dr. Jones, I'm going to start with you, but this question is really for both of you. What can be done to better understand this dynamic that we're talking about, this need for justice and equity in healthcare? How can we address the disparities, especially as we think about COVID-19?
Thank you for that question. Thank you for this opportunity to be celebrating at this dinner. And what I guess the first thing we need to make clear is that it doesn't just so happen that COVID-19 has been disproportionately impacting communities of color. It doesn't just so happen that Black and Indigenous and Brown people are more likely to be infected and more likely to die from this virus. And when we first became aware of this differential impact way back in the end of March, beginning of April, actually the whole nation was like, oh my God, what is happening? Because we knew that there was no human on this planet that was immune to the virus. So why are we seeing more Black and Indigenous and Brown people being infected and dying from that? And there was a whole recognition that what the virus was doing was showing that opportunity is not equally distributed in this country, that exposure to risk is not equally distributed, that there are ways of structuring opportunity and assigning value in this country by race that were being exposed. That is, this virus was exposing structural racism. Now, here we are, so 9 months later, and you hardly hear people talking about this disproportionate impact of the virus on people of color anymore. It started that way. It is still that way. And now, of course, many more white people are affected and dying by the virus, but the disproportionate impact remains. And the disproportionate impact as a story has become normalized. It's not even in the news anymore, in the same way that the differences in the numbers of our babies dying before their first birthday, the infant mortality rates, the differences in those by race has been normalized. The differences in the number of mothers dying in pregnancy-related deaths has been normalized. The fact that people of color in this country are more likely to be overweight or obese or have diabetes and the like, which is not just a happenstance. It's because of the conditions of our lives, has been normalized. And we talk about the pre-existing conditions. And of course, those people are going to die more because they have more pre-existing conditions. But the existence of the unevenness of those pre-existing conditions is not a normal thing. So I was heartened at the beginning that the racism that structures our society was given a light by COVID-19, and then a much bigger light by the murder of Mr. George Floyd, but of Miss Breonna Taylor and Mr. Ahmaud Arbery and Rayshard Brooks beforehand. I mean, afterward, and all of these people. But the threat is that we normalize those things, that all of our naming racism that more and more of the society has engaged in is going to wash out. That the seductiveness of racism denial is going to lull us back into what I describe as the somnolence of racism denial. So in order to avoid that, we need to move to action on all the fronts. On the COVID-19 front, we have to make sure that what caused people to be more exposed and less protected, right? More burdened by chronic diseases with less access to healthcare doesn't continue in terms of how we roll out the vaccine. We need to make sure that we move into action on all of these fronts.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. Dr. Metzl?
I could not agree more. And first, let me also say thank you. I'm so honored to be part of this important conversation. And I'm thinking back as Dr. Jones is talking about that moment in March, February last year, that really terrifying moment where we realized on one hand that we were all vulnerable by nature of being human to this new pathogen that really nobody had any immunity against, and there was no biological predilection of any particular person or group. Just on the kind of cellular level, everybody was susceptible because of this pathogen. And then we started to see what was happening, which was that this pathogen was floating down cracks in our social networks, in our social structures, and it was illuminating opportunities that we didn't allow, structures that we didn't build, healthcare networks that we never followed through on. And lo and behold, the people who were getting infected and dying early on, increasingly clear, were the people who were the most vulnerable, marginalized communities, Black and Brown communities. And that was really a moment, right? I mean, to me, that was the moment really of the pandemic. And I think history is going to judge that moment of the pandemic, because at that moment, we had a decision to make as a society. We could have either said, they are dying. Those otherized people who were already otherized by the nature of the structures we built to other them, or we are dying. We Americans are dying. We citizens are dying. We humans are dying. And the fact that we chose the former narrative, I think white mainstream society, the fact that we said, well, we don't have to worry about it so much because those other guys, the people who deliver our packages, those are the guys who are dying. It's not us. And to me, that was the moment we lost the pandemic. Honestly, I mean, I hope we turn it around. But that moment when we didn't recognize those structural inequities were really the inequities that we needed to address. In other words, to address the pandemic, we needed to declare war on inequity and say that we are all equally vulnerable because of our imbalanced social structure. And what we need to do is we need to democratize access to resources. We need to democratize access to healthcare. We need to make all people safe or nobody is safe. And the fact that we didn't do that, again, was for me the moment we lost the pandemic, right? Because what happened was it created narratives of us and them. It created a fodder for a polarizing narrative, which we have seen play out at every part of this. But the other thing is, in addition to the stuff we didn't do, we also didn't reimagine inequities, right? This is a challenge for us to reimagine inequities. And so that moment of the pandemic spreading was a moment to say, let's reimagine things. And there's so much fantastic historical precedent for societies that have been challenged at a moment like that. You can think, for example, of the United Kingdom during the Second World War. People are being bombarded, they're being blockaded, they're starving, they're dying. And they decided collectively, let's democratize access to food and healthcare. And it turned out during the Second World War, life expectancy went up in the UK, and they created the framework for what became the NHS, the National Healthcare Service. And so we were challenged in a moment to better ourselves. And many people did. I'm not saying every single person, but I'm just saying as a political unit, our country, the fact that as we saw what was happening in the pandemic, we didn't declare war on inequity. I think number one is the lost opportunity of this pandemic. And number two, it makes us vulnerable to more pandemics, right? Because inequities are fault lines. And those are the everyday things that marginalized communities live with. And they're just, incredibly clear at these moments when like a pandemic, where it's just unavoidably clear.
If I might jump in on that.
Please
Thank
do.
you.
Please
Yes.
do.
And so when you even look at the timing of the calls to liberate Minnesota, liberate Michigan, liberate Virginia, those were exactly following the first stories about the differences, the differential impact. And it reflects, so I entirely agree with you. And that liberate, that thing that, well, it's just them and trying to protect them is going to infringe on our freedoms is what has caused us to lose control, as you say. There's another framing that I'd like to lift up because we saw it then, but I'm continuing to see this, the way that we have treated this pandemic as if it were a medical care issue, as opposed to being a public health crisis. But the fact that we've been treating it as if it were a medical care crisis or issue has made it a medical care crisis, has shown up now in 5 different ways in our society. The first way that I saw that, what I mean by that is like, you can either be narrowly focused on the individual, or you can be thinking about what's happening for the whole population. The first way I saw it was how we were thinking about testing, where we were only testing, especially at the beginning, people who were symptomatic to confirm a diagnosis, as opposed to doing a public health kind of surveillance approach to testing to understand how much virus is there out there in the community. If we understood the current amount of virus in the community, even today, we could get a better handle on it. We still have a time-lapse idea of how much virus is in the community, because by the time you are testing people who are symptomatic, they were exposed 7 to 10 days ago. And so the idea of how much virus you have is now 7 to 10 days old. And in the context of exponential spread, when we're not wearing our mask, when we're not giving people income support to stay home, when we're not having protected workers and workplaces, then we're having exponential spread. So I'm going too far in that, but I just have to say that approach to testing was the first idea that I had, we're so much narrowly on the focus on the individual. We're thinking of this as if this were an individual diagnosis per, is this individual infected, as opposed to understanding. The second way that we saw it was how we were thinking about opening up our schools, where we were thinking, well, is the virus making kids sick? They don't seem to be getting as sick, and not as many of them, when we should have been thinking about, are the children vectors in a public space? The third way we started seeing it was when I started noticing our focus on the vaccine as cure. The vaccine, again, is an individual intervention. The vaccine, we're happy that the vaccine is now available. We have 2 vaccines at the time of this taping that are now going to be available to people, but that's an individual by individual cure until you get at least 70-75% of the community vaccinated. And with the slow rollout, it is not the cure. But we already have in hands the public health strategies at the individual and governmental level that we could be putting in place, that we have ignored for all of this year to control the pandemic. So that's another. The fourth is how people were thinking about masks. People thinking about, well, I don't feel like I'm vulnerable to thing, or I don't think that there's a virus out there, or it makes me uncomfortable. I don't like rebreathing my air. The whole point of mask is not about you. It's about the people around you. So again, we had this conflict between individual and community. And the fifth is how even the vaccine developers have been using their endpoints. Right now, the 2 vaccines, the 2 mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, that we have available to us, are both vaccines where the endpoint for their clinical trials is it making people have symptomatic disease? They did not use as an endpoint, are the people getting infected enough to possibly not get sick, but possibly to continue to spread? Again, even those endpoints were at the individual, is the person sick, and not thinking about the whole public health. So I just want to say that in this country, not only do we have this we-they thing going on, we have an individual versus collective tension going on. And the way that we have dealt with this pandemic has all been narrowly focused on the individual and kind of a medical care of the individual thing. And if we were to have a broader community view and a public health view, we would have controlled the pandemic long ago without a vaccine. The vaccine is not the cure. Our view needs to change to really get to the cure.
Well, are you hopeful? Dr. Metzl, are you hopeful? Dr. Jones, are you hopeful that now we see and know that we'll do better the next time?
Oh.
I share Dr. Jones' view here, and let me just say, I mean, we'll know a lot more by the time this video, but this taping is watched. We're taping this 2 days after the vaccine program has started, and very limited. And I'm very hopeful the vaccines work. Give me all the vaccines. I'll take them all. And I think that so I think there is, on one hand, a kind of narrative of science. It's a corporate narrative. It's whatever, but it is also it is a reasonable way to think about ending this moment. But I would say that I share Dr. Jones' frustration that the lesson of this pandemic has been about it's a political pandemic. It's a social pandemic. It's an inequity pandemic. And so, in a way, I worry that the story of this vaccine, depending on how it plays out, it really almost heightens the need to talk more about these inequities. And the reason is, again, because the safety for us was this: we were unsafe because of the coronavirus, because of this novel pathogen. But we were also safe because of the inequities. And so I just think that if we don't really think about the term I use as structural competency, the ways that we can become more structurally competent as a society, to think about ways that we can make people less exposed, less vulnerable. And so it's just ironic that at least at this one moment, we're having a debate about the vaccine and who's going to get the vaccine. At the same time, that we're having a debate about whether or not Congress is going to give people $600 at a time that people are facing evictions and starvation and things like that. And so in a way, it's these two narratives that are going different directions. And it's just so frustrating because, again, I use the UK example. There's so many other examples of times where at this moment of challenge, if you take the path toward toward justice and equity, it sets your society up for the next century in a way. I mean, we took the wrong path. After the Civil War, there was a movement called Reconstruction that was going to give people equal access to land and to the economy. If we would have taken that path, the South wouldn't have many health inequities it does now. But no, it became this racism and inequity story. And again, when we're challenged, we have this unsolved racial fault line that just ends up making us more vulnerable. And so I guess the answer is both things. On one hand, hopeful for the vaccine. On the other hand, worried that we're not learning the bigger lesson. And the bigger lesson is that even with the vaccine, the people who were vulnerable are going to continue being vulnerable. And we're not growing as a society in a way that honestly, to use Amartya Sen's terminology, will make a better society. The society we want is the society we will get if we addressed inequities in addition to the pandemic.
There are I have identified 7 cultural barriers to us getting there, Jonathan, that I'd like to lift up now, because the reason I said, no, I'm not hopeful is because, you talked about the history is saying that we don't take these opportunities. And those 7 barriers are, we in this country are so narrowly focused on the individual. We don't even see systems and structures. It makes systems and structures either invisible or irrelevant. So when you say that the opportunity to see these structural fault lines, some people think, oh no, if those people just tried hard enough, or those, so there's that. And so then that's the whole notion of, if you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, if you worked hard, you would make it. The myth of meritocracy, the fact that we don't even know our history that you're talking about, the fact that we're ahistorical, we think the present's disconnected from the past, the idea that we think that if you gain, I lose, this myth of a zero-sum game, the fact that we're not even looking at the future, we don't even try to protect our children or the planet because we have a limited future orientation, the fact that we think that this country is doing the best, that this country is the best, the myth of American exceptionalism, that we have the best healthcare system. We won't even look at what is happening in the UK with the national health system or anything else. And white supremacist ideology, which made people feel that those people were getting sick because somehow there's some hierarchy of human valuation and those people are just inherently weaker. So, I could go deep in all those things, but for us to get past, for us to use these opportunities as you have suggested, means that we need to rewrite these structural or cultural memes, if you will. We need to say, no, it's not about, we can't be narrowly focused on the individual. We have to become collective. Well, how do we do that as a society? I don't know.
So thank you, Dr. Jones. And you've opened the door for a conversation about the work you've done and the information you reveal in your book, Dying of Whiteness, Dr. Metzl. Walk us through, based on what Dr. Jones has just said, what you discovered and how we can change these terrible systems and educate people. Is it even possible?
I do think it's possible. For me, the answer to that question is to build systems where people are rewarded for cooperation, not for competition. Dr. Jones used the word zero-sum formulation, a zero-sum game. And basically what that means is that this idea that either I win or you win, but we can't both win. That I want to win and you want to lose. And that's a social psychology term, but that's a term that is used to think about how particularly white Americans think about race. I think about that story. I think about that term a lot because my understanding really of the pandemic goes back to research that I was doing for the book around the time that the Affordable Care Act was coming out. And the Affordable Care Act, especially for many southern states, was going to be really almost manna from heaven in a way. These states had very poor public health systems. People were dying not just of chronic medical illness, but also because they couldn't afford to go to the doctor for a checkup that might catch something. There were also very high rates of medical bankruptcy. People were paying way too much for prescription drugs. Kids were getting kicked off their parents' plans way too early. People were getting penalized for having pre-existing conditions. And along the way, while I'm doing my research, comes this thing called the Affordable Care Act, which wasn't perfect in its first iteration. But it promised people answers to many of the problems that they were suffering from. And I'll never forget when I started doing research, talking to many working class white Americans about the Affordable Care Act. Some people said, this is awesome, man. I'm going to get some help. I never have had help, paying for these things. But a number of people said, I'm not going to sign up for a program that's going to help those other guys. So the kind of central quote of the book is a guy who told me, I'm not signing up for a program that, as he put it, is going to send my tax dollars to Mexicans or welfare queens. Now, this was an ironic quote for a couple of reasons. One is that this man was literally dying of liver failure, and he wouldn't go to the doctor because he didn't want to participate in a system that might benefit him, but would also benefit, quote unquote, other people. But the other thing is, actually, believe it or not, when you're building a national healthcare system, you want people to think in national terms, not in tribal terms. You want people to think, gosh, let's build the biggest system possible and let's get everybody involved, because that way we can democratize risk, democratize cost. And so in a way, this idea of I'm not participating in a system that might benefit somebody else, or as he put it, like somebody else might game the system, it just led us down this wrong path, because ultimately many of these same southern states, as I show in my research, ended up literally rejecting free healthcare. Medicaid expansion was literally free healthcare for a lot of southern states that needed it. And the fact that they could rationalize that through this logic of race, of like, I don't want to help those other guys who are usurping, it led to dramatic falls in life expectancy, not just for the at-risk minoritized communities who are already at risk, but also for white people. That's why the book's called Dying of Whiteness, is that people were literally trading in months and years of their own life because they couldn't conceptualize the opposite of a zero-sum formulation. They couldn't conceptualize a system where everybody wins. But that's what happens when we all wear a mask, for example. Everybody wins, right? And so you can't think about it in terms of winners and losers. Now, the other part of this for me is a structural story, which is that so many structures are set up to enhance competition, not reward cooperation. And the reason I say that is because if you think, for example, of tax cuts that take away lots of resources from everyday people, those people then are feeling like they're in competition with each other, when really all the resources are going to help wealthy people and corporations. You think about our social media networks, networks like Twitter, for example, they reward people fighting with each other. You don't get a lot of clicks for like agreeing with each other or trying to empathize with each other. And I have a full list. I'm writing a piece right now, but in a way, if you want to cooperate, if you want to reverse this zero-sum formulation, it's not just in people's minds, it's that the structures that we build as a society are pitting people against each other for limited resources, as opposed to thinking we all win. And in a way, that's why I'm worried about this vaccine also, because in a way, it's turning out to be a competition game when it should be a cooperation game.
And where do we be? It's so mega, and the issues that we're talking about. So where's the education begin? Who's responsible for marching ahead of the parade and saying we need to be going in this direction? Where do we start, Dr. Jones? Where do we start?
I think we need to start with learning history and learning how these kinds of formulations have failed us, and also learning from other countries that do things a different way. So we need to learn by reading. We need to burst through our bubbles of experience, right? So each of us is in a bubble of experience, our kids' schools, our communities, our workplaces, or whatever. And some of our bubbles are actually kind of big within bubble boundaries, and some of our bubbles are smaller with thick plexiglass boundaries. And sometimes we're tinting our bubble boundaries, and sometimes we're polarizing them, but we all, in whatever kind of bubble we are, we most often don't know that just across town, there are people who are just as kind, funny, generous, hardworking, smart as we are, who are living in very different circumstances. So we as individuals, and we as communities and corporations and governments and all, need to find ways for us to burst through our bubbles of experience, to experience our common humanity on different, in very different circumstances. Because when we experience our common humanity, when we know somebody who is just like us but living in very different circumstances, we can start building common cause. Right now, it's almost like we're living really on different sides of the track. We're living on different sides of an open-closed sign. I have an allegory that I use where I imagine being born inside a restaurant, sitting at the table of opportunity eating. You look up, you see a sign that says open, And if you wonder about other people coming in the restaurant at all, you wonder, why don't those people just come on in and sit down and eat? Because you don't recognize that what's really going on is the two-sided sign. Now, those on the other side of the sign are very well aware that the sign is two-sided because it proclaims closed to them, but they can look through the window and see people inside eating. We need to recognize that there are two-sided signs going on, and it's not just the sign, it's the sign, the door, the lock, that there are structures going on. We need to dismantle those, because if we were all together, then not only would everybody be able to eat, but we would have great conversations, we would learn, we would build a bigger pie. Sometimes I think people don't want to find out what's going on the other side of town because they've been made afraid of those people, or they think that if those people just weren't lazy or stupid, then they could be in a different situation. So I think we need to get to know one another, and we need to recognize that structures exist, that two-sided signs are operating today in our society. Those two things, those realizations would get us started to thinking not about my children and your children, but our children. All children are our children. It would get us to having a conceptualization of we. And right now, it's all about me.
Well, your illustration is perfect. The sign with two messages on both sides, on either side. So, Dr. Metzl, again, who starts the ball rolling? I mean, we know, and that probably all the people who are watching this program know we need to do things to change these structures, to pivot, to turn things around so that we can get there. This is what we're talking about. How do we get there? So where does it begin?
Well, I'm a structuralist, as you can probably tell from some of my answers here. I mean, I absolutely, let me say that there is a personal reckoning that needs to happen, that kind of anti-racism is leading us in a way that is, highlighting people's own personal accountability, which is a vital first step. There needs to be truth, reconciliation, reparation. All these things need to happen on individual and community levels, absolutely. But I also, again, would say that I think that every industry has a kind of structural version of this competition over cooperation narrative that needs to be reversed on an industry by industry basis. I mean, media and social media as one example. It's no mystery that our media is completely polarized, and our social media is totally polarized as well. Social media platforms like Twitter, for example, you monetize hate. Basically, you get more advertising money if you say something really controversial, something, President Trump has made a living off of this. And so is there a way to change the algorithms on social media, for example, why don't we monetize kindness? Why don't we monetize empathy? There are ways that we can change that conversation in a way that rewards people for doing the opposite of what that system rewards them for right now. If you think about our political system, for example, this is another obvious statement. People are elected now to not compromise. You go in to hold your party line, and not just congressmen and senators, but judges, for example. There's no reward for compromise in our political system. So people go in to hold the line on their ideological position. How can you politically reward cooperation as opposed to what we have now? We literally monetize and reward polarization. And I can go on down the line. But I would say even our healthcare system, for example, there's no monetary reward for becoming a structurally competent healthcare system. I have some ideas for how I think that could happen. But again, if you just go industry by industry and you just take that simple framework of do we reward cooperation or competition, you'll see that competition is winning out every time. Now, that's probably how capitalism works, but it doesn't have to be so egregious as we have now. So my answer to that question is always reimagine and change the algorithms and start monetizing and rewarding the good stuff, not the bad stuff, which is kind of the system we have right now.
Well, I think the resistance then is, how do we convince people at the top, the gatekeepers, decision makers, the leaders, those power structures that you talked about, if they feel like this is an advantage to them, the way the system is, what will motivate them of these glowing ideas about, oh, we're all one and we're all in this together? It doesn't seem to be, the message doesn't seem to be getting there. Dr. Jones, what do we do?
Yeah. So I think that we have to also invest in the children. I think there are two things. So I define racism as a system that does two things. So the structural piece, and I'm all in with Dr. Metzel about structures. You know, whenever I say the word racism, I'm talking about a structure, not an individual character flaw. But so racism does structures opportunities, it structures, and racism and sexism and heterosexism and capitalism, all of these things are creating these structures that Dr. Metzel is talking about, and it assigns value. And I've often been asked, if you had to choose, which thing would you choose first? Would you address the structures or would you address the value assignment, right? I'm coming to your question, Angie, but in this way. And what I have decided is that we must go with addressing the structures first, because these structures are the things that control our opportunities, right? And our exposures. That if we were to try to change the values, if we were trying to make everybody, kumbaya, right? And we were to cleanse the minds and the souls and all, but the structures, as Dr. Metzel said, were still there that are prioritizing competition over cooperation, then we wouldn't do it. So we must change the structures first, but we also need to interrupt the mindsets that value, that love competition. So we need to change the structures and interrupt the transmission, the intergenerational transmission of these negative values. And we do that in how we educate the children. So we do that through some of my allegories, which will equip parents and teachers and librarians to let children understand that structures exist and that they're important, and that racism exists and all. So I think that we have to it's an important thing that we have to get enough people who understand the importance of the we at the top of structures or advising structures to change them. And we need to let the people with the bad attitudes die out without letting those negative attitudes continue to infect the children. So we need to do a values intervention as well, which might be through our teaching and how we socialize our children.
I want to turn the conversation a bit, because this is a piece of that a lot of people might not think about. But let's talk about gun violence and the role that it plays in this conversation we're having, because we see in our community gun violence and lives being lost. What is the impact of that fact based on this health crisis that we're in? Because they go hand in hand. Dr. Metzel?
Well, a lot of my research looks at gun violence, and a lot of the research I'm doing now as well. And for me, this is such an important, similar metaphor to what we've been talking about here. I guess for me, guns are a perfect almost allegory for the pandemic itself. A tremendous loss of life. Some people are much more at risk than others, and an inability to think communally, to come together to form common solutions. Now, I think the three most important things to know about gun violence. Number one is that there's been a tremendous shift over the past 50 years in just how we think about why people who own guns. I know there's a long tradition of gun ownership. Why people own guns. If you look at Pew opinion polls, for example, from 3 decades ago, and you ask people, why do you own a gun? People would say things like, I have a family tradition of hunting. I passed down from my grandfather. That was about 80% of the people. Only 12, 13% of the people would say, I fear other people. If you look at opinion polls now, over 80% of people who own guns are afraid of other people. It's, again, a competition narrative that has replaced another kind of narrative. People now fear other people. And the minute you start fearing other people, this is where these racialized stories, these, gangbangers and carjackers, all this stuff the NRA talks about, it takes hold, and people all of a sudden buy certainly many more guns. But why did we shift from a family hunting narrative to a fearing other people narrative? Well, if you look in my book, Dying of Whiteness, I go point by point. That was a very conscious marketing strategy to highlight and illustrate particular racial fears and play to them in a way that changed people's attitudes about guns. And so number one is we've changed why people own guns in the first place, which taps right into everything we're talking about here. All of a sudden, it's a narrative that is about fear other people, don't get along with other people. So that's number one. Number two is we've had a 30-year research ban because the NRA and its politicians had something called the Dickey Amendment. So how do you stop gun violence? If somebody tells you they know, they don't, because we don't have the research base, because we had a decades-long freeze on federal research, which led to that. And number three is we're going to need that knowledge now because, unfortunately, gun sales went up about 800% during the pandemic. And what we're seeing in the pandemic is not just about just the everyday toll of gun violence in this country, and especially now resources have gone away from helping people. Getting shot in the arm in some places like Philadelphia and Baltimore is fatal right now because all the resources are going toward coronavirus in a particular way, but also rise in what I study, gun suicide, despair, all these things. And so we're really going to need a national reckoning, not just about the pandemic. We obviously have the coronavirus, but the pandemic of gun sales and gun violence, I think, is going to be an increasingly urgent issue, and one that, just like the pandemic, we're starting behind the 8 ball, and we're going to have to do quite a bit of catching up.
But Dr. Metzl, I want to ask you, why do you think that the gun sales increased during the pandemic? I have an answer to that. I'm interested in yours first.
Well, mine is that behind so much of everything I've been talking about is this austerity narrative in this country. It's very, very useful. In other words, if you want to foment racial resentment in this country, just tell people there's only 5 cherry pies and there's 30 people who just ate dinner and want dessert. And so if people feel like, oh, there's only 5 of those, I better go get my thing or something. In a way, people have become very tribal in this country. Now, we do this on a financial level in our country because there's plenty of money to give everybody health care. There's plenty of money to have good roads and bridges and schools in every neighborhood. But we don't do that because we pull the money out of the system to give it to wealthy people and corporations in the form of tax breaks, which then creates this sensation of competition among groups, which brings out racial resentment. And we certainly did that with guns in the beginning of the pandemic, where the minute the pandemic hit, the message from the Trump administration and the government was, they're going to take away your Second Amendment rights, or there's not going to be enough guns, or you better go out there and get a gun because your neighbor might get the last gun, not you. And what we saw were around the block lines across the entire country, people who, like, their grandmother went and got a gun because guns became like toilet paper, like Purell. It was the scarcity, austerity, competition narrative, which then unfortunately brought guns into homes. Number one, where there wasn't a lot of training, and number two, like, these were homes where, like, kids were being homeschooled and people were social distancing, which just increased the lethality. So for me, it was the competition, not enough toilet paper or Purell, and austerity narrative that fomented this racial fault.
And I would add to that I think it's preparing for or fearing a civil war.
Mm-hmm.
So from a Black perspective, hearing all of these kind of right-wing bloggers and radio hosts and all really supporting the notion of a civil war, and hearing all of the disinformation even continuing right now about who won and who didn't win the election and all of that, and understanding that this racial divide has been fanned and magnified, and it's being celebrated as a tool for those at the top. I think that we can't think it didn't happen because of the pandemic. I think it happened because of our politics, and everything else you said. But at least from my Black perspective, it wasn't about scarcity at all. It's about fear.
And also a certain fear of anarchy, and everything goes into it. This fear that the government's not going to protect you, take the law in your own hands, which again ties right into this tribal. It's not ironic that in those early, I'm not even going to use their name in this to give them any publicity, but all these groups that want a civil war were part of those early groups that were fomenting a lot of this narrative. So I totally agree. All these things go hand in hand.
And we're not safe. And I would say, even when there's enough of the population that is vaccinated, right? Or even when we do all the public health strategies that we need to do at the individual and governmental level to kind of put a lid on the pandemic, we are still very much at risk from this division. And still, and so the healing, when you ask, Angie, about what are we going to do to heal this, I honestly don't know, but we need to understand that we are all in this together, that this is one nation, and we need to be interested in each other's stories. We need to start believing them. We need to join in each other's stories in a way that is really quite challenging still. But if we understand, if we acknowledge each other's full humanity, if we acknowledge that there but for the grace of God go I, if we acknowledge that it's not that I'm sitting at a potluck dinner and I don't want you to come over here and eat because I think you're going to eat all the food, but that I see your value. I see all the cakes and pies and roasts and salads that you're bringing with you, that we can enlarge the pie. We need to do a lot of messaging around that and a lot of connecting around that, because this country is about to crack up. I feel scared. You know, we said, you know, let's have straight talk in this conversation. My straight talk is we're going to have to do a lot of intentional healing, or else the wound is going to become an abscess. It's going to fester. So the intentional healing is going to need all hands on deck. I really love, Dr. Metzl, all of the strategies that you've given. And then each of us needs to be thinking in our own places, well, what is in my toolbox to bring about this healing? This is not going to be, this is an all hands on deck emergency. And that's all I have to say. And do I think we can make it? I think we've got to make it. But it's going to take all of us.
I just heard on the PBS NewsHour Pew Research poll that said only 42% of African Americans said that they would take the vaccine, and they have lots of history behind that, fear and concern and doubt in the vaccine. So what can we do, Dr. Jones, to encourage the African American community to trust this vaccine? Should we encourage them, and who should do that encouragement?
Oh, lots of questions in that. First of all, I also saw in a poll that 42% of Republicans said that they also didn't intend to take the vaccine. So I think it's important for us to look at lots of different populations. I think that there are a lot of unanswered questions that all of us have about the vaccine, but and I would say we don't need to try to convince anybody. We need to take people's questions. We need to answer their questions truthfully, where a lot of the answers are going to be, we don't know yet, because we haven't been following people who got the second dose long enough to know. We know maybe the 2-month safety profile, but we don't know the 6-month or a year safety profile, because we haven't been following people for 6 months or a year. Or we know that, you know, in 40,000 people, we haven't seen these kinds of events, but we don't know if there's something that's so rare that it would occur in 1 in 100,000 people, because we haven't followed 100,000 people yet. So we need to be honest there, but we also need to be honest about the fact that at least the first 2 vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, are showing amazing effectiveness, right? So we need to answer people's questions honestly. We need to say that when we're looking at a risk-benefit analysis, that the risk of dying from COVID-19, if you have that, we live with uncertainty. All of us live with uncertainty. And I've decided that I would rather live with the uncertainty of what we don't know about the vaccine safety profile rather than die from COVID-19. So when my turn in line comes up, I'm going to take one of the vaccines. But I am not trying to convince anybody. I am trying to answer people's legitimate questions with the fullest information that I have, acknowledging that many of the answers are going to be, I don't know. And then to say, you know, this is what I would do, that you might choose to take the vaccine now. Maybe you choose to take it in 3 months or 6 months or whatever. But I think that, and I know that there are organizations like the 4 historically Black college medical schools, the NAACP, the National Medical Association, and churches and the like, who are also trying to get all of the answers that they can so they can inform their communities, not try to coax or cajole or convince people in those communities.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Dr. Metzler, you're nodding your head in agreement.
Well, I mean, I think it's important first, again, that, we were talking about truth and reconciliation before, but first we have to step back and say, why are people mistrustful? Certainly that's a different answer depending on who, what community you're talking about. If you're certainly even members of the African-American community who know the history of the Tuskegee studies, know the history of, my book before this one was about Black Power protesters who were locked into mental hospitals. And so in a way, there's a reason to mistrust, which is about just the history of the treatment of minoritized communities by the medical industrial complex in a way. And so it doesn't just come out of nowhere, right? That kind of mistrust. Conversely, I think many, white Americans might be worried about, fear, the things we were talking about, a fear of authority that they've been hearing about for so long, fear of government. So you have to recognize why people are mistrustful in the first place in order to understand how you can maybe think about addressing that. And then again, I think Dr. Jones is exactly right that this is an evolving situation. I mean, the virus itself is only, 10 months old, 11 months old. And so we're doing the best we can. I mean, it's pretty miraculous that we even are talking about a vaccine at this point. But a lot of the answers to the most pressing questions are, I hope that efficacy holds up. And we honestly don't know. Now, there is something about this vaccine that I think they haven't done a good enough job of getting out, which is also that this is a synthetic vaccine. So I think a lot of people's fears of vaccines just in general about getting the illness are not going to be, I mean, what you're worried about in this vaccine is your own body's immune response, but you're not being given a live vaccine or an attenuated vaccine or anything so I also think there's a lot of misinformation out there about why people are worried about the vaccines. You're not going to catch the coronavirus from a messenger RNA vaccine. So I do think they also, as they get their sea legs under them, they're going to have to start telling people, this is a boutique designer vaccine that is not, it's not of this earth. and so you're not going to catch the virus from it. That's got to be part of the effort.
Right. We have to get people's questions and then answer them.
Yeah.
That has been a stated fear. And the fact that people perceive that it was just instantly designed and developed over these past 9 months, when it really did include the research that's been done on SARS before. I mean, it's a body of research that's been ongoing and now rolled into this vaccine, as I understand it.
And maybe there's a good effect. Maybe it'll grow hair on my head or something. Maybe there's some side effect we don't know about yet. I'm happy to give it a shot, so to speak.
Well, I have one more question for both of you, and it's a big one. Can you both discuss some innovative ideas and initiatives, maybe from your own home areas, that worked or that did not work, that may be helpful in informing us and addressing public health issues? So, Dr. Jones, I'll begin with you.
Okay. I would say that because my work is on naming, measuring, and addressing the impacts of racism on the health and well-being of the nation, I would like to lift up anti-racism efforts as being innovative in our society. 4 years ago, when I was president of the American Public Health Association, I launched our association on a national campaign against racism, which had 3 tasks: to say the word, to name racism, to ask, how is racism operating here, meaning in my child's school, in my workplace, in my community, with regard to police killings of unarmed Black and brown men and women, where you actually are trying to identify levers for intervention by looking at the elements of decision-making in our structures, policies, practices, norms, and values. That sounds like a lot, but what you're looking at is the who, what, when, and where of decision-making, like who's at the table and who's not, what's on the agenda, what's not. These are our structures. You're looking at the written how of decision-making in our policies, the unwritten how of decision-making in our practices and norms, and the why of decision-making in our values. And then after you get a lay of the land, how is racism operating here in any of these settings so that you can identify targets for action, then we need to organize and strategize to act. We need to understand the power of collective action, that it might seem like too much. Well, what am I going to do about racism? But the question is wrong. It's not what are we as individuals going to do, it's what are we as collectives going to do about racism. So I would say that I already know that that kind of framing is impactful, because there are, the last time I looked, which was actually about 3 weeks ago, 146 cities or counties, or in 5 instances, states, 146 jurisdictions that have passed formal declarations that racism is a public health crisis. These are in 28 states. I know the numbers are increasing as we go. And that is important for us to put racism and anti-racism on the agenda, right? That's the naming piece. Then we have to go beyond that to asking, how is racism operating in all of its manifestations, including many of the things that we've been talking about today, and then organize and strategize to act. If I were going to say the first 4 actions for an anti-racism agenda in this nation, I would say the first is reparations to descendants of Africans enslaved in the US, as well as full honoring of our treaties with our, indigenous people, right? The second would be decarceration, right? And so we can have a long conversation. Some people have talked about abolition of prisons, but decarceration, so that we don't lock up so much talent in our prisons, but that we have different approaches to justice. The third would be massive investments, kind of a Marshall Plan of investment in communities of color that address all kinds of things, housing and education and environmental cleanup and green space and the like, and investing in banks and investing in businesses and the like. And the fourth would be massive investment around our children, because our children are the future. Massive investment around children and their families and early childhood education and the like, so that we would not even be able to conceive of disadvantaged children. The term disadvantaged child would be like, what do you mean by that? Because we would not even conceive of a child either being born into disadvantage or finding themselves in disadvantage. So I think that is the work. I think it starts with an anti-racism framing, and then implemented in all these ways will affect all of us, because racism, yes, unfairly disadvantages some, yes, unfairly advantages others, but racism saps the strength of the whole society. And once we recognize that, then we can all develop a sense of urgency about dismantling that system.
You just took us to church, Dr. Jones. You just took us to church, Dr. Metzl. In this last moment, what comments do you have about innovation?
Well, I love that idea. I mean, it's funny, but I do have something else to say, but I will say, just thinking about how good what Dr. Jones just said, how good that would be for our country, right? I mean, think about how much we lose by not having addressed these problems. We lose lives, we lose resources. Our country is far less productive. I mean, if you close the racial wealth gap, we would have a 5 to 8% higher GDP, because more people would be paying taxes, producing all these kinds of things. So in a way, we spend so much more by not addressing the issues that Dr. Jones was just talking about. The other part for me is, I was saying before, I do some work on what's called structural competency. And so I wrote a piece with Dr. Jones, one of Dr. Jones' proteges, Dr. Maybank and Dr. DeMaio at the AMA. And we talked about what would it mean to address a healthcare system that would be structurally competent to make us more protected against this pandemic and the next one. And it was published in JAMA. I'm happy to send it out, but we kind of said clinics should also serve social needs. So the medical clinic should also have an internet provider to make sure that everybody has a computer and strong internet for telemedicine. It should have legal services there for any kind of immigration issues. It should have a vibrant food bank or food co-op or something like that. So reimagine clinics in ways that meet people's structural needs. Reimagine new kind of communication systems where people can actually converse with each other across these polarizing lines, and then reimagine a role of medicine in politics that actually is not just about one party or another, but actually advocating for the public health of the nation more broadly. I think that for us, those were kind of structural interventions that could learn from the crisis of this moment, but build more vibrant support networks for protecting us as we go forward.
To build more vibrant support systems as we look forward. And that's what we're trying to do, is how do we get there? Dr. Jones, Dr. Metzl, thank you both so much for your wisdom, for your hard work, your continued work and commitment to improving our world for everyone. Thank you for your time. And I want to thank all of you for being here, and remind you that we will be back live right after this session ends, and we'll be answering your questions. So join us on Facebook Live. If you're on WNIN, you can join us there. Dr. Jones, Dr. Metzl, and to all of you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us for that conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. But this is your time now to ask questions. But before I turn it over to Angie Humphrey to moderate this session of question and answers, I would like to thank again our sponsors, Deaconess, the University of Southern Indiana, and CenterPoint Energy. Thank you so much as our premier sponsors. And I would also like to congratulate tonight's 2020 Mayor Celebration of Diversity Award recipients. You are awesome and doing awesome work in our community. So please put your questions in the chat and we will get to as many questions as we can. Again, thank you for being with us tonight. And now I'll turn it over to Angie Humphrey.
We have this opportunity, you have this opportunity to ask your questions, and we welcome back live now Dr. Jones and Dr. Metzl to field your questions and to listen to what you have to say based on the conversation they've just heard. And so you can put your questions in the chat. There they are, back again. It's good to see you both.
Good to be here.
Nice to be here.
Well, when we started this conversation several weeks ago, when we pre-taped, Dr. Jones said, well, you know, we just don't know. A lot could happen in the time between the taping and now, and never having in view what happened in our nation last week. So I want to ask you both, the mob at the Capitol, what did that event, that upsetting event, reveal based on the conversation we just had? What does that say about where we are as a nation and as people? Dr. Jones, I'll start with you.
We're deeply divided, and white supremacist thinking was evident throughout, and the differential treatment of people by race, the fact that those thousands of people mobbed the Capitol, and yes, 5 people died in that, but there was where was the police presence? There was, if those had been Black or brown or indigenous people, there would have been a massacre. The very different relationship between law enforcement and white folks and law enforcement and Black folks and others who are trying to affirm Black Lives Matter was clearly on display. It was very distressing. And as I listened to our conversation, I was like, wow, I was prescient in expressing some of the fears that have already manifested. And I just hope that we can make it through these next weeks and months.
Well, you had said in our conversation that the nation was about to crack, and it certainly has in a very dramatic way. Dr. Metzl, what is your experience of last week and where we are and what this says about injustice and inequality in systems?
Well, I knew this before, but I think the main lesson is like, listen to Dr. Jones, because when she tells you something's going to happen, it's going to happen.
Right, exactly.
And I would say, you know, it's interesting as somebody who's a scholar of race. Very often, what you do is you see these warning signs before other people do. Sometimes, a lot of people, you know, their lived experience is one of racism or structural racism in society. But for other people, the people I interview a lot of times, there's also a lot of denial, like, oh, it'll never get that bad, we'll never get there, that kind of stuff. And so I just thought it was kind of denouement moment of actually, here it is. It's unavoidable. It's happening right now, and these fractures are real, and this notion of white supremacy being dangerous to our country is real. And so in one sense, there was a kind of moment of, this is not gaslighting, this is not fake, this is the real thing, and here it is right before us, unavoidable. What's your response going to be? But I guess I think back, we taped that conversation a few weeks ago, and I couldn't have imagined that, you know, from the perspective of tonight, I couldn't have imagined back then everything felt like it was the worst it could possibly be. And so I hope this isn't just a point in a continuum, right? I hope that what we do is we see the monster in the mirror, and we start doing some of the things we talked about in that conversation, because I really do think this is a moment where it can't just keep escalating like this, or we're not going to have a country left. And so in that sense, I hope this is a moment where we recognize, we see, we acknowledge, we do what we were talking about before in terms of truth and reconciliation and reparation, and we turn the corner. People who want to turn the corner, because you can't have a country like this.
The other thing, though, Jonathan and Angie, is that not everybody experienced January 6th, 2021 in the same way. So there are people who feel like, well, next time we'll do better and we'll really win this country back, because they fear that something is being taken from them because of the big lie about election fraud and the like. So, and even the Congress people afterward were making false equivalencies. It's very distressing. We're not living with the same information in the same world. It's very, very scary.
Well, I think for all of us, we are wondering, based on just that event of last week, how does anyone convince a group of people who are so invested in a false narrative? What is your guidance here?
The people who promulgated the false narrative have to say, this was false. Those are the only ones who will be believed in that. And the people who have supported that false narrative have to say, mea culpa, this was false.
I think there are opportunities that, a correlate would be the trauma our nation suffered after 9/11. And all of a sudden, when we called it terrorism, there were all these things we could do all of a sudden. We created anti-terrorism task forces. We reached out to communities. We paid attention more to the kind of subterranean tensions, and also government, business, et cetera, got involved in trying to stop this. And we've had none of that until this event, or very little of it. And all of a sudden, there are all these things we can do. And so I do think that there's a recognition that, whatever answer comes up is got to be, number one, reaching out much more, of course, to different communities, understanding all those kind of things, but also, Twitter and Facebook have to be involved, and Airbnb has to be involved. And this has to be like a societal effort to say that this isn't who we are,
or what we want in our society. Well, let's turn our attention to the vaccines. Dr. Metzler, you mentioned in our previous conversation, the vaccines were just rolling out when we videotaped that, and so here we are now, and it's people are getting those shots in the arm, but it's not happening quickly enough and for enough people. So again, does that reveal the breach in the system in so many ways, the thing we're talking about right now? What does this slow rollout, this less than impressive rollout, say to you, Dr. Jones?
Well, first of all, it's about incompetence, and it's about the lack of a national plan. But it's also, even as we slowly roll things out, equity has not been incorporated tightly into what different states are doing. And so if we say the first phase are the healthcare workers and the nursing homes, but which nursing homes if there's limited supply? And actually there was a National Academy's framework for the equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccine that said that we needed to use a vulnerability index to say, if we get a limited supply in our state, and we're still restricting it to healthcare workers and nursing homes, but which ones? Well, let's look at the 25% most impacted and most vulnerable communities and get it to the nursing homes there first. I haven't heard anybody talking about that. I'd be interested, Dr. Metzel, in your response. But then, Angie, if I could reserve maybe 3 minutes, there's another important message about vaccines and the relative importance. This vaccine optimism we have is good. It's important. But I just want to share a story after Dr. Metzel answers this question to help us understand what's really going on with the spread of the virus right now.
Of
I'm,
course.
I'm happy to wait 3 minutes, Dr. Jones. So why don't you take it away, and then I'll clean up afterwards. So go ahead.
Okay, that sounds great. So, as I was discussing before, we have this very narrow focus on the individual, and we're so happy now that we have vaccines, and we're going to be working more toward therapies at the individual level. What we have in this country started out, I'm going to make an analogy now. It started out, let's say, as a grease fire on somebody's stove, but since it was only affecting those people, we didn't really feel like we needed to put a lid on that. So then it spread to the kitchen, and then the whole house and the neighborhood and the whole city, and now the whole nation is on fire. And the vaccine I liken to fire resistant garments, like what firefighters wear, one by one. But even firefighters with their fire resistant garments, they don't stand around a burning house and hope that their fire resistant garments are going to put out the fire. No, they jump into action to try to address that fire. So all of us need to consider ourselves as firefighters. So that's the one part. But the other part is a riddle to help you understand that we will never deal with the pandemic with vaccine only, right? We have to use bigger public health strategies because the virus is spreading exponentially. And we as people do not understand what exponential spread is. So here's a riddle to help all of us understand what exponential spread is. I'm going to set up the riddle, then I'll ask you the question. So the setup is there's a big lake, big, beautiful lake, pristine, and I like lily pads. So I plant a lily pad in this lake. And this lily pad doubles every day. So on the first day when I plant it, there's one lily pad. On the second day, there are 2. On the third day, there are 4. On the fourth day, the next day, there are 8. The next day, there's 16 and so forth. So here is the riddle. If the lake becomes fully covered by lily pads on day 40, on what day was it only half covered? And people are like, oh, let me get my pencil and paper. Oh, what is it? The answer, do you have the answer, Dr. Metzel?
I would say the day before. That would be my guess.
That's right. That's right. On day 39. Most people say, well, is it day 20? It's day 39. That is what exponential spread looks like. From half covered one day to fully covered on the other. So what we're seeing with the pandemic is not just a post-Thanksgiving Day surge or a post-Christmas and travel surge. We are seeing those things, but those things are not just going to die down in a few weeks without strong action, because what we are in the middle of is exponential spread of the virus. And to deal with that, we all have to become firefighters in wearing our mask and physical distancing, hand washing, all of that. But we also need the government to come in to make it safe for most people to safely shelter in place with not just the one, $2,000 thing, but maybe monthly until the pandemic is over. We need to pay people to stay at home like many other countries have done. And for those who really are essential, we need to make sure that their workplaces are safe and that the workers are protected. So we need the Occupational Safety and Health Administration to put in regulations about workplace safety in the context of COVID-19. If we need to invoke the Defense Production Act for more PPE so that the bus drivers and the warehouse workers and all have full PPE. And we need to do the public health surveillance. We need to do so much more, because what is happening is that the virus is spreading exponentially. But the vaccine is being rolled out one by one arithmetically. Arithmetic increase in the vaccine is never going to douse exponential spread of the virus. Vaccine is the mop-up thing. The real action right here is in the public health strategies that we have been neglecting for a whole year, but now with the new administration, we're going to be on it. Wear your mask. I don't care if you got vaccinated. I don't care if you think it is. It's not about you. Wear your mask for the goodness of others. Government, make it safe for most of us to safely shelter in place, even this late. Make workplaces safe, workers protected, and then we can get a handle on it. And then the vaccine will be the mop-up job.
Okay, we have 2 questions, I think. Can you pop those back up? Okay, from Ms. Gallagher. She's saying that saying the election is a fraud is a big lie and won't heal our nation until the election's properly investigated. How do we heal, Dr. Jones, based on this kind of conversation in the public? And Dr. Jones and Dr. Metzl both, but this is directed to Dr. Jones. Can you?
Yes, we've investigated it. There have been many, many lawsuits alleging different parts, fraud in different ways, and all of them have the investigations, and then the lawsuits have shown nothing. So it's been fully investigated. It has been fully investigated, and the people who are trying to suggest that that the questions haven't been answered yet, that's not true. That's not true.
Dr. Metzl.
I completely agree with that. Of course, I mean, I think that the inauguration is on Wednesday. We're going to have a new administration. We're going to have a new approach to the coronavirus. We're going to have a new approach to many of the issues. Very dear friends of mine are going into the administration to help right the ship here in a way. And so I feel like we've done the legal due diligence of exploring the election results. And I think really, either we come together under the initiatives, like Biden gave a speech the other night. He's going to, do many of the things that the prior administration did not do. So more money for people, more coordination about the vaccine, more coordination about the pandemic. And I think really these new national programs are hopefully going to be ones where people start to get on board with regardless of ideology. But I do feel like, as someone who studies the legal history of the United States, that there probably hasn't been an election that has been as closely analyzed and certified and validated as this one. So I feel very confident that the election results that we had for this election, really, hopefully we can move on from that. I think that point has been proven over and again.
We have a question, I believe, from one of our award winners. Do we have Dr. Stratton's question there? Okay, we'll go into Antoinette Caldwell. What are some ways we can best inform and support our children during these uncertain times? There's a lot of information, a lot of fear, but not a lot of answers. Dr. Jones?
I'm going to let Dr. Metzl take that one first. Dr.
Metzl?
It's interesting. This pandemic is so hard, right? I have little nieces. They might be watching out there. They're little kids right now, and they're suffering in a way that is that's the suffering of this pandemic of their age group, right? They don't get to hang out with their friends the way they do. They don't get to socialize the same way. There are people in their 20s who feel like they're in their prime and they're missing their chance for career opportunities. There are people in their 40s and 50s who feel like, gosh, this is how I'm spending my midlife here on Zoom and all these kinds of things. And so I think everybody is suffering individually and in ways that are linked to the trauma of just lost time, lost connections. And so number one is, I think we just have to be honest with each other that we're all bonding together. I think that in a way, the traditional role, I teach college. I've never been as open as this with my students and just saying, hey, we're all going through this. I don't know what next week is going to bring, but let's keep moving forward. And so I think the fact that we're all vulnerable, we're not similarly vulnerable. Many people are vulnerable in ways that are more enhanced because of all the things we talked about in the conversation. But I think there's a level of honesty also with our children right now of saying, we're all going to get through this together, and there's going to be hope on the other side, but also recognize, like for right now, as Dr. Jones was saying, this is our life, right? And social distancing and masks and all these kind of things, they're with us now. And so I just think I can just think about my engagement with students. I've never been this honest about just shared vulnerability. And I think that's important, and also recognizing all the societal vulnerabilities we talked about before.
And the only extra thing I would say to that, thank you, Dr. Metzl, is that although we say social distancing, what we really mean is physical distancing. And what we especially need right now is more social connection. And so for people to bind more closely through all of the different technology ways that we have, and for people to join more organizations and the like, that we cannot become socially isolated. It's too much. So.
Yes, it's a strain. And Dr. Thomas Stratton has a question. Like education and law enforcement, medicine struggles mightily with inclusion and representation. How can we build future generations that will connect to communities they serve? Who wants to take that one?
I'll just say very briefly, those people should be coming from the communities. So we need to make sure that we invest in all of our communities in excellent public education in all of our communities, and making sure that opportunities are open to people from all communities, so that people from the communities are not served by people who are outside of the community. We can all make bigger and bigger communities and all, but one way is to make sure that the doctors, that the lawyers, that the police officers and all have an opportunity to be from those very same communities.
Yeah, I agree completely. That's exactly what I was going to say.
So now we have from Anna, what do you think of the mask mandates that don't have provisions that allow for enforcement? I know there are fines designed to only punish the poor, and I'm generally opposed to incarceration, but what can be done from a government perspective to actually enforce the mandates? Dr. Metzl?
Well, we're not going to do it in this country. Talk to anybody from any other country right now. Try not wearing a mask in France right now and see what happens to you. Go to Singapore and don't wear a mask and see what happens. And so, a mask is a representation of a public health infrastructure where people are buying into the notion that the health of the individual is connected to the health of the communal. We've lost that in a certain kind of way. And so part of the issue is there's no mystery. It wouldn't fly here for a second, but in places like Europe right now, there are very heavy penalties for not wearing a mask. And in places like Singapore, for example, see you later, dude. And so we've decided that that the individual narrative is more important than the communal narrative. And in a way, based on our conversation before, we struggle to have a communal narrative. So part of the issue with masks, I'm just going to tell a little side story, which is when I was studying the Affordable Care Act, the very beginning of the Affordable Care Act, when it first came out, we were doing all these focus groups and everybody was really excited about it. I mean, Republicans, Democrats, poor, red, blue, everybody. And then about 2 or 3 months into it, there was this machine that started telling people that's government in your life. You don't want creepy Uncle Sam in your medical room. And all of a sudden, everybody turned around. There's this machine here that basically tells people, the minute you tell people, oh, it's government intrusion, or it's assault on your liberty, or God forbid, Black and brown people are going to get benefits also, all of a sudden it becomes this fracturing narrative. And so I think we need to learn from the Affordable Care Act story. I think we need to learn from the mask story. Why is it that masks became polarized? A year ago, nobody cared about a mask. And so in a way, I think we have to learn so that we can subvert this polarizing machine. Because really, honestly, we shouldn't even be having this conversation about a mask. It costs 99 cents. It'll save your community and your grandparents, and we should all be doing it. It's not that big of a deal. But the fact that it became a political symbol is something that's a symptom of a bigger issue, and we need to really address that bigger issue.
Agreed.
So true. From Gina Robson. Good morning. Good evening there, Gina. It's good to see you. Can you provide any insights from neuroscience or psychology about what motivates or rewards tribalism and division? What should those trying to break through a polarized culture do and not do? Dr. Jones?
I can't answer that. I am not in that science. I don't know.
Lay it on me. I got you right here.
Okay, Dr. Metzl.
Well, I'm going to call on social psychology, the idea of the zero-sum formulation. We talked about it in the conversation before a little bit, but the idea that there are winners and losers. That's how we think about race in this country. If I'm going to gain, I've only going to do it because that other person's going to lose. I don't want to join that system because that system is being gamed by undeserving immigrants and minorities. Our idea is very tribal, and it's actually a social psychology that goes back to the Du Bois wrote about this in the period after Reconstruction, calling it the wage of whiteness. And if you think about it, that's not how it works. If everybody wears a mask, everybody wins. If we have a national healthcare system that serves everybody, everybody wins. And so we should, so the idea here is, if people can look it up, zero sum formulation, the idea that my group can only win if that group loses. And if I let that group into the game, they're going to take all the stuff that was meant for me. That's a bad framework when you're thinking about the coronavirus, where either we're all at risk or none of us are at risk. So we should want everybody to be on board. And I say that also as a critique of liberals, right? That liberals very often say, well, those anti-maskers, they deserve what they get or something like that. But that's zero-sum formulation also. We should want anti-maskers to not get the coronavirus because it makes everybody safer. It's not a morality tale in a way. And so we're so polarized that we can't think in terms of everybody wins, but that's really got to be the framework.
And I think perhaps we can reframe it as we against the coronavirus and using all of the tools. And so, many people are excited about the vaccine as a tool, but we haven't talked about the mask as a tool. We need to understand. So I know that President Biden, President-elect, soon to be President Biden, is going to ask people to wear their mask for 100 days without a mandate or anything. But if we understand that these are tools to protect our society and our nation from the coronavirus, as opposed to something that divides us one from the other, maybe we can reframe that. And we need people from all sides of the aisle and with all kinds of expertise, or down, community level, and all to help us figure out how do we reframe this so that we can be against the virus. The UK, their tool is save the NHS. Everybody puts their mask on because it saves the national health system, because they love their national health system so much. Right? We don't have a thing like that we can love. So we can maybe say, save the US, save our population by wearing masks.
And so who brings that message? Who creates that message? Who drives that?
Well, there are methods for that. There are methods for that kind of messaging where you learn about local communities. I mean, part of the issue, I study rural white America. There are a lot of people who feel left out. There are a lot of people, and it's not relative. It's not like because other people are more left out, they don't feel left out. A lot of people feel left out. A lot of people feel distrustful of the government. Now, the irony, of course, is they feel distrustful of the government. And look, the government, the same government that just blew the vaccine rollout to this point. So it's kind of a self-perpetuating cycle. But you have to understand what beyond the headlines. I mean, right now we're all distant, so we only see the most extreme stories, but on the everyday level, people in communities have issues and concerns. And so you've really got to learn the concerns of communities, and you've got to then partner with trusted messengers in those communities to get the message out. There are methods of conflict resolution that go into, I mean, they're developed in other places where they're on the brink of civil war, but that's what we need to do right now is to partner with trusted messengers, to think about communal conversations, to think about trusting each other, and try to get people to imagine a shared future together. What would that look like instead of this hurtling toward conflict, which feels like what we're doing right now?
We need to really value each other. We need to really value each other. I value all of us. Each of us has something to teach, and each of us has something to learn. We need to walk in the world in that way, curious about what this next person I'm going to meet can teach me. What can I learn from there, and what can I share with them out of my experience? So we do have to be interested in the stories of others, believe the stories of others, and then join in the stories of others without fear, but with curiosity.
So we have just in another minute, we have Carolyn Gallagher has a question about Senator Rand Paul telling people to throw away their mask after he received the vaccine. Comments about that?
Yeah, don't do that. That's crazy.
No, the masks are the most effective right now and most economical and most feasible thing that all of us can do right now to staunch this exponential spread of the virus. And so we all can have agency in stomping this thing out. We have to recognize that's one of our tools. If we want to be powerful, put on a mask. It's not about you, it's about what we're doing for each other and for the nation. And that is our power. It's a superpower. So maybe we say the mask is our superpower. I don't know if that will work. Yeah.
I'll wear that bumper sticker and that T-shirt.
And if I
Brian
can,
Kellums is here, and he is a wonderful friend of mine, and we're concerned about when we're ever going to be normal again. He wants to get back to doing his Special Olympics.
I miss that. I miss normal life so much. I'm an extrovert. All this introvert stuff is just killing me. We'll get there. We'll get there together, doing the things we're talking about. I think that the conversation we're just having about taking care of each other, and I think again, social distance and mask and all these kind of things. That's how we get back to normal life. I think this idea it's so frustrating when I hear that Rand Paul stuff, because the whole idea of herd immunity turned out to not take account of the virus mutating. It's totally false and it's not effective. So the way we do it is we imagine a communal, and we work on that communal together.
What we have to imagine is that we are the bison, right? And the virus is coming at us, attacking us. And so we have to circle up with our horns out. We need to each do what we can as part of the whole thing. If the bison just wandered around singly, then they're going to get picked off by, I don't know if wolves get them or whatever. But if we come together, we can protect one another and protect the whole. So we have tools. Right now, the tool that each of us has is a mask, and our physical distancing, hand washing, all of that, and advocating for more government intervention to not only eviction moratoria, but maybe rent forgiveness, which is across all communities, right? So we need to band together against the coronavirus and not divide against each other and cause the whole body politic to get sick and to fracture and to die. So if we understand that and use our power that we have, the simplest power we have against the coronavirus is a mask. I mean, like, just do that. I don't understand more. I mean, I said it 5 times now. Okay, so
It is time. It is time to say goodbye. And I want to thank you both so much for taking the time to be with us, to educate us, and to keep this conversation rolling. And I want to thank all of you who wrote your questions in. I'm sorry if we didn't address all of them, and I know there would be more, but thank you for watching. Thank you. Now take this with you into your workplace, your world, your church, your community, and let's do exactly what these 2 wonderful doctors have suggested, and all realize we're in this together. Thank you, Dr. Jones. Thank you, Dr. Metzl, and thanks to all of you for being here.
thank you all.
Take care, everybody.